folks! This is Star here to let you know that my comic Castoff's main character Vector is now available as a plushie! The sales period runs through the month of February, so check out the Makeship link in the description to snag a tiny plush Vector of your very own before time runs out.
Just do it! Don't let your dreams be dreams. Yesterday said tomorrow. So just do it! Make your dreams come true!
Hello and welcome to Screen Tones, where we talk anything and everything webcomics. Today we're going to be talking about tragic backstories. I'm Delphina, I use she/her pronouns, and I make the webcomic Somnambulous.
And I'm Crispy, I use she/they, and I make the webcomics Ghost Junk Sickness and Lunar Blight.
I'm Verathane, I use she/they pronouns, and I make the webcomics Geralt and Witchwood.
And I'm Ray. I use they, them pronouns, and I make the webcomics On Empyrean High and Overlord of Ravenfell.
And I'm Star. I use she, her pronouns, and my comic is Castoff.
Excellent! Okay, so let's not lie to ourselves. We've all been in the misery pit before. Maybe we even haven't left, thinking about poignant and tragic beginnings to our character stories. And you know what? Tragic backstories are a trope for a reason, because painful experiences can add depth and catharsis to characters. But how do we make them resonate with our audiences emotionally in the context of webcomics? I think we need to talk about that because it's a big thing. So I'm just gonna throw this out there. Tell us about your use of the tragic backstory trope. Like, who are among your saddest blorbos out there? Like, tell us what's up.
I'm excited for this episode. As a conversation that kind of comes up like literally everywhere, and we've all been there, like Delphi said, growing up, writing stories, imagining this stuff in your head as an edgy, angsty teen, and you're just like, yes, I want them to just they got like death and they killed the people and they blah blah blah. It's just a lot. It's gonna be good. As far as myself, I'm gonna talk about like a character that exists in my stories now versus a character that when I was a teenager and I couldn't stop. And it's great because they're actually from the same story. So Ghost Junk Sickness is I want to say it's kind of like a reboot. I've had this story since 2003. Fades into dust. And it's gone through a lot of iterations. And one of the things that I think about, like, when you're kind of discussing like tragic backstories, is like you see media and you're just like, oh my god, like that was so cool. I love how like epic sauce that character was, but also like you get attached when epic sauce character is harmed. So a lot of that gets absorbed into the writing. And so for me, I think my saddest blorbo in the Ghost Junk now, I want to say like the trio. So I have three main characters, Vaughn, Trigger, and Bogmouth. And a lot of like the stories that we write are very, I guess they're angsty. I'm calling myself out here, and I guess I just gotta get used to this.
No shame.
This is the call out episode. That's why we're here.
Listen, this is the Wet Cat Olympics, all right? That's what we were calling this episode before we started recording.
It's true. So like I'll start with Trigger. So he is a sad wet meow meow because of like a lot of his decisions. He thematically in the story was written about owning up and running away from your mistakes, and just kind of like challenging them and having facing them head on kind of thing with quite like abrupt situations. And I consider him quite wet as a cat.
As cats go.
Just the way you said that. He's quite wet.
The funny thing about Trigger is he puts himself in the rain half the time, too.
Lets himself outside.
Yeah.
He knows he's competing.
Self-sweating cat. That sounds
No!
bad. Don't air that.
Don't air that. Editors,
Leave
get
this in. No,
out.
leave this in.
Yeah. So this man voluntarily, like, he does let himself out in the rain. Like, he just keeps staying there. Like, they're like, the door's unlocked, buddy. You can come in. And he's like, no. So he has, like, a family that has a lot of kind of angst, a lot of tension with his dad. He didn't have a good father relationship. He gets into a lot of messy situations with partners and stuff like that. And it's a lot of like self-inflicted stuff. And then, of course, like one of his biggest moments of punching you in the face with reality was like losing a limb and getting himself blown up. And I'm like, kind of saying it plainly like this makes it sound very edgy. When we're just like, oh yeah, like this character done gun goofed up. Also he explodes. So
Oops-a-doodle.
oops-a-doodle. And like I think of like some of the things behind that. I'm like how edgy that was. As far as like yeah, I'm gonna move to another character because I'm just like, is that as edgy as the next one I'm gonna talk about? No. So the other main character that we have is Vaughn. And I feel like they are beautiful in edgy character categories just because they have superpowers too. And I feel like that is just like a theme for edginess, is to have like a secret power that they can't control. Looking at you, Thane. And like this character has like these like superpowered arms that they don't know where they got them from. And they like had a family that they lost tragically, that had ruined their own kind of like physical self, that eventually kind of led to spoilers. And thinking about how I have constructed it and how they kind of like it's just hidden and kind of angsty when it's slowly alluded to it. And I don't know, it's just it really is a self call out episode with this one. And so a lot of characters that I have a lot of family issues. Like that's a big thing with like, the dynamics of unresolved tension with their parents. Same with Boggs. Like she has a parent who kind of just wanted her to stagnate and stay how she was. And so the angst kind of grew from there. But I'm going to throw the mic at our next person, Thane. I'm sorry, Thane. I'm poking with that one. I've taken enough air with this one.
Well, that you've got plenty of sad wet cats. My wet cats definitely fall into a certain bunch of types, as I've been called out for already. Is this a self call out if you do it first? I do love uncontrollable superpowers. It's true. They're just very juicy. There's a lot of stuff to mine there. You can have like characters who have done something terrible within their own life completely by accident, or like hurt people very close to them, or even killed them. That has not actually. I have a bunch of characters that have not shown up in my comics, and some of them have backstories which go like all over the place. I also love super soldiers just in general, especially if they're like they've gone rogue and they're going against their programming. And I just love something about that kind of dichotomy of like they have this like a natural power, and they're an outsider to society, but especially if they like want to help, or like they're operating from like a strong moral core or something like that, partly because I just like that in a character, also partly because it makes the angst worse if they're like trying to do the best, but like everything in their life is like pushing them to like do the worst. So to try to identify my saddest and wettest meow meow, I kind of got like I'll go with an example from each of my comics. And so I guess Kieran in Geralt, he's pretty pretty sad. Not sure about the wetness quotient, like trying to gauge these things on a spectrum. I don't know. We've put this Olympics in here. But so his deal is that he was a small child who died tragically of illness, and then as his parents and community were grieving, there was a terrible magical backlash from an evil wizard that killed them and put the evil wizard's soul into his little body and raised him as an amnesiac monster who is human enough to like want to be a part of society, but extremely different and was just shunned forever. So, good start to,
That's
to
pretty
things.
great.
I mean, I enjoy it. I don't. I mean, he doesn't. Anyway,
I'd say the wetness is pretty good for that one.
Yeah.
I suppose
Good wetness
there's
quotient.
like eldritch
Sog.
goop involved, I suppose.
We
Lots
need to
of like
you need to toss them in the dryer to dry them out a bit.
Just tumble him
needs
around.
around in the dryer. That's an event in the Olympics. Just all of them in the dryer, bouncing around. Yeah. I'll also to throw in an example from Witchwood, my current comic that I'm working on. Felix is like he's another kind of part human and part something else who was raised believing that he was created in a test tube basically to be a super weapon that was used by humanity against the invading alien force that is mortal enemies, and so he's got powers from this alien species, but he could literally be like jumped into and controlled, like just kind of mind hacked by like the people who are like getting him to do stuff, and because he's like fundamentally just like a good boy who wants to help, uh, they tell him that he's doing the right thing, and he just kind of believes it and goes along with it, even though it definitely hurts him a lot all the time. So I don't know. Just
That's quite
having
wet.
fun with. Yeah.
Verbiage we're going with for the
Okay.
entire episode.
I
Like
guess
he's
so.
literally
Yep.
a flesh mecha.
Basically, yes.
So
In fact, literally that.
yeah.
That's some Evangelion
Complete
shit.
with like glowing circuitry lines, because if you're gonna do this kind of thing, you got to be cool with the visuals,
Yeah. Yeah. 100%.
like projection energy wings, because I also love that kind of thing.
Wings make everything better and sometimes more angsty.
They do.
It's
Actually,
true.
I'm gonna pass the Olympics baton to Ray now.
All right. So most of my saddest, wettest blorbos was probably from my vampire comic that I created when I was starting out and I was a teenager. And I would say Charon was probably my saddest and wettest because the other wet blorbos were mostly my friends' characters. But he was pretty much a vampire who was originally a knight from a religious order whose job was to fight against supernatural creatures. And then a vampire bested him as like, you know what would be really funny? Turning him into a vampire. So he had kind of a mental break and is like, well, my old life is dead, so I'll go by this new name now because, that's what you do when you're a sad anime boy.
You change your name and move to a different town.
And
Dye your hair
of course, it has to get sadder and wetter because his brother never believed that he was dead and had to go look for him. And eventually it comes out that their grandmaster made a deal with the vampire and essentially just tossed him over to the vampire so he
Dun,
could get what he wanted.
dun.
And also ended up being the one responsible for killing their parents because, I had to make
Yeah.
them sadder and wetter.
It's always with the parents, isn't it? It's just
It
like,
really
yes,
is.
angst
It's like
begins.
it's like the Disney rule. You can only have at most one parent alive.
It's so true.
It's like inversely proportional. The number of parents you have alive is inversely proportional to how sad you are.
It really is.
So the
That's
more
really
parents
true.
alive, the less sad you are. The fewer
Unless they're
parents
asshole
alive, the more
parents.
sad you're. Also true.
Okay, when you're a teenager coming up with like the saddest and wettest and angstiest like blorbo that you can, like having a stable and happy home life is a little bit like, incongruous with that.
Yeah, you can't have them have a happy life. You have to have them sad and wet all the time.
Listen,
Yeah.
this was maybe a challenge that I took on in my very first webcomic because my main character was pretty sad and wet, but also she had both parents that were still alive and she was like 15. So it's like, hey, well, the second main character has a whole other thing though.
Tell us about them.
Well, so with my first webcomic, Sai, it has not been running for years and years, but my first main character, most of her sadness and wetness came from things that happened in the actual story. But then the secondary main character, her best friend, had this whole tragic backstory we never got into, where like his parents were in a car accident and his mom's dead and his dad's like paralyzed from the waist down, so he
Oh my
can't like
God.
and so it's like his family's falling apart and it's just like, and he's just like, yeah, no, I'm good.
Oh my God.
We never got there in the story because I stopped making that comic. But yeah, that was a thing. God, actually, now that I think about it, the blorbos in the first webcomic were like on a different level, and that feels like it makes sense because that one I did start developing when I was in high school, and so a lot of the sadness is way more like just hitting you with a baseball bat, essentially. It's very not covert. But as far as comics that I would like people to actually read, don't look at the other comic. Don't look at the old one. Don't look at it.
Google down.
No. Good luck finding it. There is a K-pop artist with the same name, and it has effectively killed my SEO. But anyway.
My God.
If
So
only
that
that could
happened.
happen with my first one.
But also, it was on Smack Jeeves, which is now dead. Rest in peace.
Poor Remote.
That's my tragic backstory.
Rest in peace, Smack Jeeves.
R.I.P. Rest in wetness just came to my head. No. Cut this part out.
That one.
I'm going to refer tragic characters with that all the time now. Thank
Rest
you.
in wetness.
Okay.
Rest in a puddle of your own tears. Peace be with you and your tragic past. Anyway, so in my current comic, I was lamenting this before we started recording that I think probably one of the sadder blorbos in Cast Off, we haven't gotten to his shit yet. And I'm like, oh man, am I allowed to swear on this podcast?
Yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to
I think we already said asshole.
I'm trying to avoid it. And I was like, wait, actually, I don't know. Are they going to have to edit that part out? Should I redo that line? Anyway. Because like we haven't really gotten to his stuff yet, so listen, call me in like a couple chapters when Sarah's backstory starts coming out. But the long and short of it, the parts that have been revealed so far is that a lot of people have died, and he blames himself, and that very much like guides his actions moving forward. And he keeps having these trauma nightmares, and I'm like, good, suffer. Fun to draw. The trauma nightmares are fun to draw. Okay, leave me alone. But also, I would throw several of basically all of the main cast of Cast Off has some sort of inherent tragedy in their backstory. They're fueled by either like a dead family member that they're trying to get revenge for, who is like wrongly killed, and they're like trying to figure things out. We've got several characters with family issues. We've got a character who is like responsible for the deaths of a whole lot of people and isn't quite sure if he should feel bad about it, but he really does. And then we've also got our main character, Vector, who at the time we are recording this, I know this episode isn't going to come out for a while longer, but at the time we are recording this, has just found out that instead of, being born and then found in the woods and adopted like a normal person, is actually technically kind of not a person at all, according to him and the guy who accidentally invented him. He is just the shard of emotion that was ripped out of another person's soul and then was so powerful it manifested its own being. And he's like, well, what am I supposed to do with this information?
You
Time
gotta
for
get a
mental breakdown.
keyblade.
Basic, oh my god. Oh no, wait. I hadn't thought about that.
Oh no!
Oh, now I have to draw that crossover. Beans. Because, I accidentally just redid Organization 13, didn't I?
Oh
Jesus.
no!
Because, so many of the characters have similar things going on. And we just had the backstory of the guy who caused all of it, Sage. And we got he got a whole flashback chapter dedicated to his tragic backstory, because it was plot relevant. And he's like, hey, by the way, I accidentally caused the entire plot of this webcomic. Bye! God, now I'm going to be thinking about Kingdom Hearts again. Oh, no.
This is a good thing. This is a very good thing. That
Just gotta get a keyblade.
Yeah,
No.
I love this.
Well,
I absolutely love this.
I think I just had an idea for a future Mail Club crossover illustration. Beans.
I am not sorry.
How dare you?
I love the like people who are not people sorts of characters though too. Just like when it's like, oh, I thought I was like a full person and it turns out like I'm not. And how am I going to deal with that? I'm not mentioning that for any particular reason in regards to Somnambulist.
No.
But I do want to say like originally in my original draft of Somnambulist, Rana was a ghost who was like killed by a steer and bound to a steer. And the only person who could see Rana was Sydney for some reason. So Rana reaches out to Sydney to fight a steer and free her spirit. I don't think I got like far enough to like actually figure it out. Like, so free her spirit so she could pass on or something like that. But like, just this like, I did not go that direction. Some of that is gone, but yeah, it was so much, and I think part of me realized that, so I stepped back from that. I feel like Astyr got really angsty. He was born in a magical lab as a lab rat with his siblings, and his mom especially. We'll go back to the parents. You get the impression never regarded him as anything more than an experiment. So he's dealing with that when he finally finds her again. But they escape from the lab. He has to kind of hide who he is from society. He messes things up a lot because he doesn't know what he's doing, but he still tries to keep like cheerful about it. And I think my flavor of sadness falls a lot into like that Tears of a Clown stuff, like characters who are just going through thing after thing after thing and pushing it all back to try to keep smiling or try to keep strong or say it's no big deal, and then eventually they break. That's but yeah, and then Sydney is a little similar. Like, she's raised around this religious order. She's a knight. She has to fight evil magic people, or who she's been told were the ultimate evil. And she has this kind of arc deconstructing that. But then eventually she goes home and she has a lot of questions like, why was I taught this? What's going on? And the answers she gets back from her superiors and her loved ones are just increasingly more bad. And there's like memory things. She gets disintegrated. She gets thrown in prison. She almost gets killed by her god. And I went through this. I actually decided like to do this like Inception Sad Cat Olympics approach where she gets to live the tragic childhood of another character by going into their mind. So like, I don't even know where that falls on the spectrum, but I just thought that was interesting when we were talking about this because, so yeah, just lots of sad.
That's like a sadness inception.
Oh my god. I gotta say though, I also love the like, trying to push through and like keep up a cheerful face. But now that I've heard the phrase "tears of a clown," I'm like, I can't, I can't think of it the same way anymore.
I always call it a Molotov cocktail of emotion.
Oh no, it was like an oldies song. You don't know
Yeah.
the song, like
Tears of a
Tears of a
Clown.
Clown. Like a guy who's like got broken up with his girlfriend, and then he's like, "Oh, but I'm smiling through it. You don't see my tears. I'm just gonna joke about it." Like that's kind of the theme of the song, so that's why
I've
that comes
not
up.
heard
But
that song.
I mean, you can think of like actual clowns if you want to.
I
I
was.
will.
That was what was happening.
Real sad clowns happening now.
In your area.
Oh god.
They're
They're teaming
coming
up
to
with
you.
Sad Wet Cats. They're helping them cheat in the Olympics.
Meow, meow, meow. Oh
Let
god,
them
there's so
in.
many.
Let them in. I did
Oh
want
my
to say
God.
though, I am absolutely floored by the amount of like born in a lab and then, raised like, as an experiment, because like that was one of the things from my old previous version of Ghost Junk Sickness that I had, was that Fawn was made in a lab and raised without parents and stuff. We dropped that, but I'm just like, every time I hear like anybody talk about it, I'm like, yes, I was obsessed with stuff like that. The whole test tube superpower thing, like that's my jam. And of
I'm
course it's
still
like
obsessed
so
with stuff like that.
yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to behave.
So technically the thing with Felix is like it was like a no, not a red herring exactly. He wasn't actually made in a test tube though, but he was kind of raised in a lab. So,
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, like getting taken into a lab at a young age, I feel like that still kind
Yeah.
of counts. Um, but yeah, to your point, Crispy, like sometimes you do have to rein it back because I feel like if you go through for every single thing on the menu, you're gonna get too full, right?
Mhm.
So I just wanted to like kind of go into that, like what kinds of issues can happen when you use tragic backstories, or what made you back off from that, or just any other things that you think of, like why it might not be the best idea to put all the tragedy in there.
As we've said before, kind of growing up, you're kind of hungry for the angst just because it makes you really latch on to characters. But then kind of like as you're writing it or you're getting more mature, as the ages go by, there's just an overabundance that starts to get suffocating. And I see a lot of folks with their stories kind of run into like these people that just cry like immediately, with like the smallest things, and the impact of a moment or a plot point or a beat gets taken away from the story, and it's hard to focus on what we're supposed to be kind of learning from this, and like, is it plot relevant? And I think Star just mentioned that even in passing already on this episode about being plot relevant. And
Mhm.
I understand having characters being sad, wet meow meows, and it's fun because you're just like, you suffer. It's it's something that's always happening when I'm in like discussions with folks about characters and stories, whatever, in the webcomic circles, even in any kind of writing circle, is that you always see like, well, I have the saddest OC though. Do you know how sad my OC is? And they get so smug about it.
It just gets to a point where it almost feels like they're treating it like a competition. The
Yes.
Sad Wet Cat Olympics is like, who can create the most tortured OC,
Yes.
and then brag about it to all their writer friends.
Mhm.
And
Yeah,
it's
they get really, really competitive.
so that's a sad
And,
wet cat
you
you
know.
got there. But have you seen how sad and wet my cat is?
boy,
It's
Go
the
over to this
wettest.
guy.
it's like that scene from that movie where they're all comparing business cards.
Yeah.
And they all kind of look the same, but then the guy I haven't seen this movie, but the guy's just like, my God, it even has the watermark. My God, he even has a dead village.
Yes. Oh my God, I need to make an edit with that.
My God, dead parents, superpowers they can't control. Yes, that gif right there.
Oh my god.
Tastefulness of this dead best friend.
Yes. It is that. Like you just it distracts. It distracts from what the whole point of like even enjoying the show is. And I think like the issue for me, because I don't want to take all of like everybody's thoughts, the issue for me before I pass the baton on is that I don't remember what the story is about. I remember how angsty the characters are, and I log off because I don't the impact wasn't there. And I felt like I usually call this like the hand of the author when they're like really pushing the character at the screen and they're like, look how sad they are. Look at all of people that died around them. Aren't they like the saddest person in the whole world? And it just gets a little much, especially when we're saying like it feels like a competition. And when it happens too much in the story, it feels like I'm like, I don't know, I'm being strapped down and just forced to read it as something and be like, feel sad.
Waterboarding.
Yeah, I think
with tears.
it's kind of the same thing where you have that character where, oh, everything goes right with them. They're so popular. They like automatically defeat the villain in 2 seconds, but it's the opposite of that. It's like everything is terrible. Their sandwich fell in the pool today. The villain killed their parents. Nothing goes right for them. And it's like the world is still going like around them, but they're not actually part of it.
Yeah, I guess my thing that I wanted to add is like it gets to a point where your character has suffered so much, and it just makes me want to look at the author in the eyes and be like, why? But not in the, why would you do this to them? It's like, what point are you trying to make?
Yeah.
And it's like, what is, because I mean, that kind of is one of my issues with stories that like go a little bit too hard with the sadness. Like I ranted about this in a video recently, but like this is why I stopped watching The Walking Dead. It's just like it feels like these characters are just miserable for the sake of being miserable. And if you get off on that, then sure, that's one thing. But like it's just, why am I wasting precious time in my life just watching these characters be sad? What is the point of it? What are you trying to do with this sadness? How is it affecting how your characters move through the universe? Because at some point, it's just you're making them sad just to make them sad, and then point at them and be like, look how sad our characters are. Look at them. And this was a point I made on Blue Sky the other night where it's just like, I feel like a lot of more inexperienced writers or writers who are drawn to like this kind of, we'll call it misery porn, maybe even. It's just like they just want to point at a broken thing and be like, wow, look how broken that thing is. Isn't that interesting? But like a lot of times the answer is no, it is not very interesting. I want to know why you have done this. What is the point?
I feel like part of what tragic backstories can be kind of useful for is like fueling character motivations and goals. Because sometimes you build these things in and you set up your storyline where, like, whatever things are happening in the plot, and then you can have a moment somewhere, maybe soon, maybe late, where you reveal things and you get that, like, oh, that's why they've been this way, like emotional beat that like kind of emotionally punches the audience when you like sort of unveil what's been making this person tick, and that kind of thing, it's like, oh, it is catnip. Those can be such great scenes, but you do have to be kind of careful with it, because the way you get the most impact out of it is when it has not actually been the entire story so far. So the like if the story has been kind of nonstop big tragic moments, then it can kind of take away from the impact of the beat itself, and overshadow the actual events of within the comic, especially the rest of the cast. Like if you have like a bunch of characters, maybe there's something that is just so big and so dramatic that now nobody else really gets any air, like emotionally speaking, because like this thing is just so big and so horrible. Whether it's because you just don't have page time to spend on them, or you just kind of can't, like you don't get around to it really, or you give them their beats and it's in between like something
Mhm.
else horrible happening. um but if you try to be like, oh, but everybody else also has their own tragic backstories going on, and you try to show all of those things, it can get really like overwhelming,
Yeah.
and have a really bad effect on audience immersion, especially if you stay too long in the tone of the tragedy reveal, because then
Yes.
you can have, things will just get very monotonous, like emotionally speaking. It's like flat because it's been at one emotional note the whole time with no variation, and that makes you lose a lot of impact.
Yeah, and I think that's a pacing issue, especially with webcomics, because we're all working on webcomic time. We're all trying to like get the stories out as fast as we can, but it's still taking years, and people can't do this in like people can't take that kind of tone for years. So what might have actually like worked in maybe another medium and maybe a book or a scene where you could like get through that scene in, the reader could reasonably get through the scene in a matter of minutes, is going to take so much longer. Like that's why when you have to try to take into consideration like, hey, am I spending too long? Have I spent long enough establishing a character that someone cares enough about to even like feel the things I want to feel about them? Because like there's a lot of people that are strangers to me that like, yeah, on a very basic level I will feel sad if they tell me that their cat died, or their
Mhm.
other things have happened to them, their sandwich fell in the pool or whatever, but I'm not gonna have the same emotional reaction as like somebody who like I saw them build that sandwich for
Mhm.
like a
Yes.
year. They were so invested in the sandwich. They were looking forward to eating the sandwich. They had it up to their mouth, and oh my gosh, it just fell in the pool.
Mhm.
That's how you kind of do it. And so it's about pacing. It's about looking for the opportunity to show why this is important and what's important. And I feel like a lot of us get into our heads with our blurbology. We've been with these characters for years and years and years, and the reader doesn't know them quite like we
Yes.
do. So when we don't explain that and take the time to show the characters in their element and get the reader to invest in them emotionally, then any other emotional impact that you try to make, whether tragic or otherwise, isn't going to land.
Mhm. No, it's perfectly said. It's exactly all of that stuff, especially with webcomic time. And like I think at the kind of end of the day as far as writing goes, like when you are reading something, watching something, playing something or whatever, and you hit a reaction that makes you cry, that really resonates with you, or just something that just evokes something quite big, you want that as a writer, you know, to have your readers experience something like that. And I think that as emotional and that powerful kind of draw, that drives a lot of people. And I think that's where the Olympics of the wet cat comes from, because they want someone during these discussions, or as their story is being released, to react that way. They want to hear someone say, oh my god, I got to that part in your webcomic where the character dropped their sandwich and I am in tears. The way that you crafted it, you know, brought me to tears of this way. And like that's the goal. The journey to get there is something else though.
Yeah, I just the way you said that just made me think that I feel like maybe something that younger or more inexperienced creators are trying to do is they really, really, they see like these emotional moments in stories, and they want emotional moments in their own stories, and
Mhm.
they want people to have those emotional reactions when they are reading their own webcomic. And I think that maybe they're kind of missing the how to get there,
Yeah.
and they see I just have to make a Blorbo who's really, really sad. And then
Mhm.
when he's really, really sad in the comic, then people will feel really, really sad about them. But it's not about how sad you make the character. It is all in the presentation of those moments. I made people cry with a hug between two characters.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was not an inherently sad moment, but, you know, this was in like the 7th chapter of the comic. We've known these characters for several hundred pages. We kind of get what they're going through at this point. And then you hit them with the line, "No one's ever called me a friend before," and you just wreck your audience. And I still get comments on that scene, and that was a long time ago. And it's like, that was not an especially sad, that was not a sad backstory reveal. Like, we already knew this about the character. It was just a matter of presentation. It's how you show the sadness. It's not how sad is your Blorbo. It is what you do with the sadness you have given to them. To really badly quote Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, I would say, like, sometimes a new writer will be like, well, if this emotional moment made everyone cry their eyes out, if I put all the emotional moments that I know about all together, all at once, people will really, really be crying. And it just doesn't work that way, because you really just get diminishing returns, like, if you just keep one tone and don't break up the misery sometimes, honestly. Like, some of the highest points will be paired with the lowest and can just give you that whiplash that makes the emotional gut punch just that more. Like, an example I would probably take that most people know would be the Mulan movie, where they're singing about how horny they are, and then they come across the devastated village.
Oh, that was so good, though.
Yeah, it's the juxtaposition, right? It's like, and that's, I feel like, why I come back to my Tears of a Clown, like, just like seeing these people like super happy and having these moments, and then, oh, okay. And you can't get that if your story is mired in the bog of the sandwich for too long. Like, it's just not gonna get there. You don't have any place to fall from unless you go up a little. So it's just
Diminishing
like,
returns is a great way to put it.
yeah. It's but I mean, even you can't start out that way either. Like, a lot of times people, I feel like, want to, or at least my original version of Zombulus, where I'm just like, oh, okay, I'm gonna show this person in a wrecked world, and everybody's dead, and blah 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 blah, and like, there's only so many ways you can go from that, and I don't know if these people care about this person a lot. So yeah, just thinking about the contrast, thinking about what you can do to kind of make that a little less monotonous.
Yeah. And, I often think about, like, jumping into advice, I guess, with doing this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
The thing that I think about is, when people kind of want these emotional reactions, is that they constantly feel like they need to up the ante in the weirdest ways. And, like, upping the ante only works if the characters in the plot who are experiencing said ante being upped, like, are invested in it too. Like, you can have, like, a story in succession, or a series or whatever, like, have, like, more and more to deal with as the seasons go on, or something like that. Get invested, but when the characters are kind of, like, not reacting to it, or when they're, I guess, the audience are not as attached to why this should mean anything, that's when you're going to start dropping the ball. And that goes hand in hand with something like the tragic backstory. Like, you can give us all of this information, like we've said a lot of times in this podcast episode, about, you can tell us that they were making this sandwich and whatnot, and we can have the backstory of, the lettuce being grown and the hand grown tomatoes. We're really going with this, but
metaphor, roll with it.
We could really go with something like this, and then the parents were half demon, half angels, and why not? And then someone was made in a science test tube and have superpowers. Everybody's glowing. I'm just throwing in a bunch of stuff. We're all being called out here. And you can get to that point, but like it needs to have a reason for existing, and just being sad is just, that's not a good enough reason for me. It might have worked, and it did work when I was younger as a teenager. It did work, but there needs to be a reason. I need to have like, is this making some kind of context as to why this character is like this in a way that affects the plot? Not solely just drama. I don't want to enter the Rachel and Ross thing. Let's not go back to stuff like that, the back and forth.
One of my favorite ways to show a tragic backstory, this is something I've done for a really long time with Cast Off. It's just my favorite. And then I've also like seen some really good examples coming out of like anime and stuff recently, is before you show the tragic backstory, show the audience how and why it affects them, and then reveal the tragic backstory later, and then the audience can be like, oh, that's why they're like this. A good example that's not from a webcomic, actually, but that some people listening might understand is Dungeon Meshi does this fantastically, especially with Senshi. I won't spoil it, but essentially, like, he's this guy, he really loves food, is, like, very obsessed with, like, making sure that everyone eats well and takes care of themselves. And then, like, about 3/4 of the way through the first season, you get his tragic backstory, and you're just like, oh my god, he's been like this the whole time, and that's why. Oh my god!
It was so bad.
Oh my
And so
god,
I think
that makes me think of that trope being misused though in
Oh, yeah?
in another anime actually. Jujutsu Kaisen. It worked the first like 2 times for me, but then the 6th time not so much, which again means you can't have like the same thing and expect the same amount of returns.
Listen, if I may have a spicy opinion for a moment,
Oh.
I dropped Jujutsu Kaisen before the first season even finished.
Honestly, you dropped it during the peak. In my opinion. So
listen, I dropped it on like episode 11 or something. I'm like, this is not going to give me the emotions that I want. I can already tell, and I never went back. And based on how I've like heard from other people talking, I made a good call.
You did. I lasted the God, I can't even remember what arc it was, but yeah, I just got tired of it after they murdered my favorite character anyway.
That's what happened to me. I got sick and tired of it. But no, I was talking about this on stream the other day, and people were like, "Yeah, Jujutsu Kaisen's not like that great, but the Doomed Yaoi is great." And I'm like, I just made a whole chapter. I'm willing to bet that my Doomed Yaoi is better than their Doomed Yaoi. And I did it in like 50 pages. It's not a canon relationship or anything, but like there were people who shipped those two. So I mean, like, does it count? I'll stop talking now.
I think this kind of ties into sort of what I would want to say as kind of advice, because there's a lot of stuff that I could say about like how to work in like a tragic backstory and like how to like help its impact and like fine tune and tailor it. But like when you're structuring a story, sometimes it's worth kind of thinking about it whether you want or whether it should be in at all. And I think one of the metrics that like is good to think about is whether this backstory fits in any way with the larger themes that your story is going with. Like if you're kind of going for something like just at a metatextual like overarching level, is it about like trust or like friendship or about like warfare or about like the nature of humanity or like something, like if there's any kind of overarching thing that you're trying to explore with your story and the tragic backstory fits in with that, then like absolutely keep that in there and go with it. If it doesn't, then you might just like want to not not put it in. You can save it for bonus content. You could kind of keep it for later. You can remove that character or like bump them into a different story. Just kind of spread it around, because if you try to show Like if you have a cast of like 5 main characters and every single one of them has like a wildly different like tragic backstory, and you're like, and then they will each get an entire like 5 chapter arc dedicated to their tragic backstory. Like that story structure is going to be a mess. I don't even know
Yeah.
what kind of theme you'd be going for with that sort of thing. But like that's what, you know, different stories are for. Sometimes you can kind of pick a focus and stick with it, and then pick other things that are compatible with that focus, that won't take air away from it, that won't like compete with it. Or I mean, a little bit of variation in theme is fine, but it should reflect in some way on kind of the larger thing that you're trying to do.
Yeah, and I think that comes into play a lot if you're working from an RP, if you're like if you've done this story in some iteration with friends and everybody has come up with their own character, nobody's necessarily thinking of each other's backstories and stuff. And I know Ray has worked that way before with different comics coming from RPs and trying to like figure out what to do with other people's characters and how much emphasis they should have.
Yeah, that's the thing too, is for an RP, everyone has a main character, at least one.
Hmm.
Um so you definitely have to decide whose tragic backstory is more important than the other, because everyone probably has a tragic backstory in RP, especially when you're teenagers. So it's definitely one of those things. I had to carve away at the angst of one particular friend's backstory because it was just too much. And it was actually pretty much all the other characters would have to stop everything and comfort this person. And that was not
Hmm.
exactly very good for getting the plot moving along. So his backstory kind of just had a very much reduced effect on the plot, and I had to like kind of reduce his entire role as well so he didn't kind of take over the stories of everyone that was at least even a little bit tied to his own story.
Hmm. Like that's just the thing though that I think about, like when I was talking about earlier with upping the ante and stuff like that, is like one thing that we've kind of all discussed about the fact that it needs that context to get that impact is that like it doesn't have to be even like overkill too. And I think like a lot of that comes from like, you know, the newer creators, younger folks just wanting to kind of hit that reaction. You know, like so I have like 9 nibblings. I am very used to being an auntie in a loud house. And one thing that kids do is that they say these things to elicit a reaction from you. And I feel like it's very similar to that, is that they'll say like just crazy things. They'll like scream, they'll be like, ah, dinosaur butts, like in the middle of a conversation, just to kind of see if the adults turn their head and be like, did you just scream dinosaur butts or something like that? And like I think a lot of it is similar with writing, is that you want to have like, you know, you're discussing in like circles of like different artists, creators, and you want like people to turn their heads and be like, oh, but you know, this story has blah 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 blah, super sad, everybody explodes with tears, if you cry you explode and die, like, you know, it's something like that. And then it just gets everybody to be like, wow man, that's the saddest thing ever kind of thing. And I think that they're just really chasing that reaction just because it feels similar to crying when you reacted to something intense. And again, I think it's just translating what you want to have your readers react to, similar to a feeling that you had. And I always think of like that thing about Ghibli films, how they cry like overly, so like their eyes are just like there's like the sea is coming out. And I can't remember exactly the quote, but I do remember it was something to do with the fact that like it's not realistic just to be like whatever, it's realistic with a meaning. And that's because they're on top of crying overly so with Ghibli tears, it's the feeling, like it's like this is what it feels like to cry, like you feel like you're just like everything's coming out. And like, you know, you can use that stuff visually, you could kind of like lean into stuff like that with different aspects to elicit that kind of emotion. And I just think that's interesting. as far as emotion goes.
Yeah, I like the parallel too of bringing in the art, because we do work in a visual medium and we can certainly use that. I really like flooding. I like that kind of like that feeling, it because it is tears. It can be tears, it could be being overwhelmed, it could just be like the fear of drowning or something like that. I think that's a really good visual metaphor when you don't necessarily want to be 100% completely literal. I think people fall into this trap when they're revealing the tragic backstory, where it's just two people in the room and it's a talking head sort of thing, and like they're just talking about it and stuff, and we don't see any visual representation of it. And we have to, kind of use all the tools at our disposal, right? So being able to show, whether it's flashback sequences or like even something even more metaphorical, like somebody's crinkling their napkin or spilling their coffee or something like that, I feel like that can really emotionally punctuate like how the character is feeling without them necessarily saying, "Oh, I'm so sad," because that's not realistic. People don't do that.
Yeah. No, it's exactly that. And I think like leading on reactions can really help really push that stuff. One of the things that I like doing in my comics is, because it's a visual medium, we have a lot of like, places to play around with and a lot of fun to kind of explore. Like Delphi said, like the crinkling of the napkins and stuff, but you can also do like color cues and other visual cues that don't feel realistic, but they just elicit like a lot of that emotion. And the other thing that I like doing is just like being subtle about it and slowly pushing some kind of like I guess cues until it kind of reaches that point of like, oh, it was relevant in these ways that we saw the character kind of slowly reacting to something that build up, and then you reach that kind of like realization or that reveal, whatever, to kind of make all those points make sense. It's nice for rereadability too. That's something that I always like to do as far as my stories is concerned, is kind of go back and follow the crumbs that were laid down, but like being subtle about it, kind of like a faucet that's just dripping, and then when it gets to that point, like, faucet's on, the water's everywhere, we gotta clean up, save the sandwich.
Rip sandwich.
We'll all
Sandwich is
remember the
gone.
sandwich. Never got eaten.
I'd be sad.
I would be sad too. But see, everyone has always accidentally dropped a piece of food they were really looking forward to eating. So you just gotta channel that pathos and make them sad about the sandwich. It doesn't have to be dead parents.
It can be
Honestly,
dead
my
sandwich.
strategy is usually like I don't make them talk about it at all. I'll just show it in little bits and pieces over time until it
Yeah.
gets its breaking point. But yeah, the showing is absolutely key. Like you got to use everything.
Well, I think I'm sufficiently sad. I feel like I'm sufficiently thinking about sad clowns eating sandwiches and stuff. So maybe we should just like call this right now while I have a BLT sandwich. I don't know. We can't do rats right now. I think we're in sandwich mode. But thank you so much for listening. I've been your host, Delphina, and you can check out my work at zombulus.com. It is the saddest.
And I'm Crispy. You can check out my work at ghostjunksickness.com and lunarblight.com. It's very tragic.
I'm Verathane, and you can check out my sad, wet super soldiers with uncontrollable powers comics at tiralt.sevensmith.net and witchwoodcomic.com.
And I'm Ray. You can check out my comics at Overlord of Ravenfell on Webtoon and on Empyrean High on EmpyreanComic.com. And I'll promise you there's very sad dragons. Not bad dragons, sad dragons.
Oh. And I'm Star. You can find my stuff at castoff-comic.com, where all the ingredients for the sandwich are sad about the separation. I guess.
So the tragedy is coming back together as a sandwich. Oh my god!
Oh, wait, important question though. Who won the Olympics?
Oh.
I think
Crispy.
we're all. Oh,
No, the readers will find out.
Next time on Screen Tones
Readers that
Podcast.
win.
Holy poo.
thank you for listening to Screen Tones, a webcomic podcast. You can find all our episodes at screentonescast.com. We've got a couple links over there to our Ko-fi and merch shop where your support will help us create more episodes and keep us talking about anything and everything webcomics. You can also find us on YouTube, Blue Sky, Tumblr, and our Discord server. Thank you so much for listening, sharing, rating, and supporting, and we'll see you next time.